What's up, everyone? DJ Sackman here. Thank you for checking out our YouTube. We really hope you enjoy our videos. In a brief moment, we'll get back to this video. But I just wanted to remind you that we have our Coaches Academy. So if you hit the link under this video, you can get immediate access to all of our courses, all of our playbooks, and our community. We have some of the top coaches in the world inside of this community and taking our courses. So if that is you, if you're a coach looking to expand your knowledge, looking to expand your network, hit the link under this video, and we feel like your Coaches Academy can really help you out. Let's get it.
What's up, everybody? It's Coach JB with HoopStudy. We are back for another masterclass. Tonight, we have Dr. Werner from the Philadelphia 76ers. She is their team dietitian, and she's going to talk to us everything that you need to know when it comes to sports nutrition and specifically basketball players. Now, before we get started tonight, I do, again, just want to give us a shout out quickly to our sponsors, and that would be Wooter Apparel. If you all need anything when it comes to shirts, when it comes to backpacks, anything when it comes to team gear, check out Wooter. And you can find that link underneath this video. And also a big shout out to Synergy Sports. If you are a coach or an athlete and you are trying to watch film, you're trying to study the game, or you're trying to get your film out to college coaches, you have to hit up Synergy. And again, all you have to do, click the link in the description below, and we'll get you sent over there to Synergy. So without further ado, Dr. Werner, it's nice to have you here tonight. We truly appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to talk to us. Give us just a quick background of how you ended up in Philadelphia, and how you chose to get into this field.
Sure. First of all, pleasure to be here. I'm so glad that you hit me up and asked me to join. I think what HoopStudy is doing it's a really cool mission. And as somebody who grew up playing basketball, I wish that there had been a resource like that when I was a kid and when I was, attempting to be a college athlete. So, my background, so I grew up in Michigan, kind of near the Ann Arbor area, and I actually did my undergraduate studies at Albion College, which is a small D3 NAIA school, and I played a couple of years of basketball there. I basically played basketball my whole life, which I think is probably the background of like every sport dietitian ever, like not basketball specifically, but sports in general. I learned at a young age that I love sports. And then I learned that I like to help people. So I was like, oh, I'll be a sports medicine doctor, because everybody dreams to be a doctor when they're going through school. And then I hit organic chemistry in college, and that quickly changed my mind. So I started studying nutrition because I recognized that in all of my years of playing sports, I had never had a nutrition lesson or an understanding of what nutrients really were. And then on top of that, I had no idea what a registered dietitian was and that was a possible career. And I was like, I've always loved food and I've always loved physiology. So maybe I should tie the two together. And that's what I did. I ended up moving to Philadelphia to do my master's in nutrition at Drexel University, and then moved back to Michigan for my residency year. So to become a dietitian, you have to do basically a 1-year residency. We call it a dietetic internship, before you can sit for the dietitian exam.
Okay.
And I did that back in Michigan, and then decided to move on to a PhD and did that at Michigan State University. And I was actually in exercise science, so with a emphasis in exercise physiology. So whatever I could do to tie nutrition and exercise together, I was going to do it. And started working with the men's and women's basketball teams there as their team dietitian. And then the Sixers position opened up in the 4th year of my PhD, and I applied and I got it. And it was COVID year, so I ended up being remote for 2 seasons. But that is what eventually got me back to Philly.
No, that's awesome. And, shout out Drexel, all the Philly people out there. Drexel is, if nobody's ever been on Drexel's campus before, the gym, when you show up, it's pretty dope. Just kind of walking down the street, and it's a really nice gym in there. What was that like working with the high level athletes as opposed to the athletes, at the mid-major level? Michigan State versus Drexel, those are two completely different beasts.
Totally different. I mean, the biggest difference obviously is budget. I think that's something that a lot of people in my position face throughout their career, is like issues with budget. And then you might get like where I'm now, which is like much less of an issue. But I always think back to my time at Michigan State, and I'm like, the things that I could have done there if I were just allowed to pay more than $11 a head for a meal. You know, if I were allowed to talk to them about specific supplements that could have been beneficial for their recovery, but we couldn't purchase them. So I think that's a big difference. And then on top of that, at the mid-major and collegiate level, you are developing athletes, whereas in the pros, you are maintaining for the most part. So it's a different mindset when it comes to nutrition itself. Pros is all about maintenance and recovery, whereas college is like they're still growing and maturing, both physically and psychologically. So you have a lot more of that to deal with.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And especially, I guess you would still see that in the rookies that come in
Oh yeah.
to the league as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how that's developed because nowadays, like we just got 2 draft picks and both of them have worked with a team dietitian before. And I was like, whoa. I mean, that just speaks to how booming the field itself is. Because when I came into this, when I joined the Sixers, I was part-time and there were 8 full-time dietitians working or nutritionists working with across the league, and 5 of them were chefs. Like they
Oh,
were their
wow.
full-time head chef. And then I think there was at least a dozen teams who didn't have a single nutrition professional at all. And then now we're at 20, I think it's 26, 25, 26 full-time team dietitians across the league. And to my knowledge, there's only 2 teams that don't work with anyone.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
love
exciting.
that. Yeah, no, that's very exciting, and it's great to see that progress coming, through the league, and like you said, in college as well. And I think, and you can speak to this better than I can, but I think just the progression of athletes accepting it is better as well because obviously, growing up, being born in the 80s, being raised in the 90s, early 2000s, there was no such thing as like sports nutrition. It was just like, oh, you need a bunch of energy, eat a bunch of carbs because you're carb loading. And now I feel like our generation was kind of the guinea pig for the
Yeah.
supplements and things of that nature. Like, start having protein, but what's actually in this protein? And you take a pre-workout supplements,
Yeah.
and it's just all kind of a crapshoot.
For sure. I think a lot of my colleagues would probably say one of their biggest challenges that they face is social media, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And that's absolutely true. It's a huge challenge. But I would also make the argument that the presence of social media and the growth of social media has been one of our best advocates because it has made athletes so much more aware of just nutrition in general. And this younger generation is actually thinking about what they put in their body, which is wild to me. Um, so yes, it does cause a lot of confusion, but it also creates a lot of opportunity for conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because obviously there's a ton of information out there now, right? So now it's more so sorting out what should I listen to as opposed to like I'm just trying to find something, right?
Yeah,
But it's great that these athletes are becoming so educated because now if you are going to come in front of a camera and you're going to say, I know X, Y, and Z, you have to know it because these athletes are going to know what, or they're going to be able to, distinguish between what is, somewhat factual and what is more towards false. And I think, Huberman had a guest on not too long ago, and I don't remember who it was, so I apologize. But they made a great point. They were saying that when they talk about a topic, first of all, they make sure that they do peer reviews and they review all those peer review studies. But the other part that I loved was that he was saying instead of saying like this is my word, it is 100% right. It's presented more of the fact that this is what I believe in. This is the evidence that leads me to believe that. But if this isn't right, somebody just explain it to me and correct me so this way we can get it right across the board.
100%. I wonder if that was Lane Norton.
That's exactly who it was. It was Lane
Yeah,
Norton. Good job.
yeah, he's one of the resources that I use often because I think he has a very pragmatic approach to this field. I think he does a really good job of kind of separating out the BS. And he's exactly right, and that's the approach that I take too. Like First of all, you can only read so much research. Like
Right.
I've done a PhD and I've read way more than most people will in their life, and I continue to because it's professional development, but like you can only read so much. And I also guarantee you, like I would bet money I could find a study to support any viewpoint anyone has on anything. Like I could probably find a study to say the sky is purple. Like you just can, because there's so much research out there, and there's also a lot less stringency on publications nowadays. So being able to critically evaluate research and read it, understand it, criticize it, and then interpret it, I think is one of the most important values that students can learn. And that's like what I tell students. And it's what I tell athletes too. I'm like, look, you have me as a resource. If you see something on TikTok, come and talk to me about it. If you have questions, I will. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. And that's, I think, the first, and I think Lane Norton has said this as well. Like the quickest way to distinguish an expert who knows what they're talking about is they'll be the first one to say, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a very admirable quality. I mean, I think, you know, if you can tell, if I think that's something that you have to be honest with yourself, right? There's a lot of people who they want to look smart, right? And, you know, a great example is, you know, saying, this is my bicep to an athlete. They don't need to know that it's your bicep, right? Like they don't need to know that your triceps going through extension to push a basketball. They're like, bro, no, tuck your elbow and follow through with the rim. Like that's all they need to hear. Like you don't need to sound smart
Yeah.
for your athlete. You just need to be able to help them.
Exactly. It's actually built me rapport with athletes before. I've had an athlete who came to me with a question, and it was one of my first interactions with him. And he was like, hey, I've heard that sparkling water doesn't hydrate you as much. And I'm like, I haven't seen that anywhere. I haven't read any research, but like, let me double check and look into it for you. And the next day I went to him and I was like, hey, I found these 3 studies that show, nope, hydrates you just the same, no issues. And he told me much, much later, he was like, yeah, that's when I actually learned to trust you, because you didn't just sit there and try to sound smart. Like you actually went, looked it up, and you came back to me. And like, so I didn't know he was testing me, but you mean he was. So you just have to figure it out and be honest with both yourself and the people around you, because nobody likes a know-it-all, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And did you find any negative side effects with the sparkling water?
No. It hydrates you the exact same.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know what they do say, like the mineral, I guess it's like if you drink too much mineral water, it's not good for your teeth, right?
I don't know. I'll ask my dentist when I go later this month.
There you go. There you go. All right, cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to answer some of those questions. I know you have a presentation that you wanted to give us tonight. So I'd love to hop in on that and see what you have for us.
Yep, absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I wanted to do something when we spoke about what the presentation should be geared towards. The thoughts that I had were primarily around like, what do I wish my coaches had known when I was growing up playing basketball? And I did gear this towards coaches, but I promise anybody else who sees this, whether you're a parent or an athlete yourself, like these are going to be valuable lessons for you. And the 2 primary things that I wanted to touch on were hydration, and then basically an umbrella kind of nutrient timing approach. And that's just going to be a brief overview of kind of how to break up your macronutrients around exercise for kind of the best training effects. So I'm starting off with hydration. If I can get this to work. There we go. I mean, it is absolutely critical for athletes. Like this is why 99% of my presentations about nutrition begin with hydration, because I think it is probably the most important nutrition topic and probably the most overlooked, because everybody's like, yeah, you just have to drink water and call it a day. Like, no, there's a lot more to it than that. Because even a body water loss of 2% of someone's body mass constitutes dehydration. And we have seen plenty of research to support the performance detriments that we see with just a small amount of body water loss. And that can lead to negative effects when we lose that plasma volume, including changes with blood flow. So that's going to affect heart rate. you're not going to be able to think as clearly, and then that is going to negatively impact performance. And this was a cool study, actually from the Gatorade Sports Science Institute by Lindsay Baker and colleagues, published quite a few years ago, but they basically put people through basketball drills at different stages of hydration and dehydration. And this graphic is a depiction of it. You can see that somebody who's fully hydrated performed better than someone 2% and then 4% dehydrated. And we saw it kind of in this this decrease, as you'd expect. The more dehydrated you are, the slower they got, the lower their levels of cognition, and actually the worse they performed on basketball specific drills. So this isn't just a study where they're like, let's look at the effects of dehydration on performance, where they put somebody on a cycle and call it a day. No, this was on court basketball drills, and they saw performance detriments with dehydration. So it doesn't get more obvious than that when it comes to research. So for someone who doesn't know the signs of dehydration, I wanted to put a list together because I think this is really valuable for coaches to recognize, because there's some things on here that you may not think are related to dehydration, such as having a headache, especially after training. That's typically a big sign of a lower plasma volume, including a dizziness. I mean, that one might be a little bit more obvious. That could also be a blood sugar thing. One that I encounter a lot is poor appetite is a sign of dehydration. So I have athletes who come to me all the time after practice. They've kind of like cooled down a bit, and I'm like, hey, don't forget to go grab some lunch. And they're like, I'm not really hungry. And I was like, okay, well, actually, here's a bottle of water. You need that first. And then they become hungry once they become more well hydrated. So it's kind of it's a self-saving mechanism that the body does to save its water essentially for the more necessary organs. And then there are more obvious signs like the dark or low volume of urine. And I have a few ways to monitor hydration that we can go over in just a second. But one thing I want to acknowledge is that when it comes to fluid intake, it's not as obvious as just drink water when you're thirsty. For the most part, that is when people begin intaking fluid. But what people don't understand is that thirst is stimulated by a couple of different things. It's either number one, a decrease of the amount of water in your blood, or an increase in the osmolality of your blood plasma, which essentially means that the concentration of electrolytes like sodium and then nutrients like glucose in your blood is becoming more concentrated. So imagine the difference between the consistency of water and the consistency of syrup. You don't want blood that is the consistency of syrup.
Yeah.
So the less water you have, the more these kind of triggers are going to go off to the brain. That's going to tell you, hey, we're thirsty. We need to drink. But that means by the time you feel thirsty, you are already dehydrated. So it's this feedback loop that a lot of people don't recognize, like, oh, I'm thirsty. It just means I need to drink water. You need to drink water because you're literally already dehydrated. And so that's why there's a much more beneficial strategy called programmed drinking, which is trying to drink before you feel thirsty, which for some people is like counterintuitive, but for an athlete, it's really important because you cannot go into, if you go into practice already thirsty and dehydrated, like let's say you might already be at that 2% dehydrated, and then you're going to make your way to that 4% dehydrated by the time practice ends, and you are going to be performing terribly. So some of the strategies that I've recommended to athletes in the past are carrying a reusable bottle, which is not only environmentally friendly, but it just has that constant reminder to you. I've even had athletes put alarms on their phones and they've hated it, but you have to train yourself into being able to drink more water. And then also you can get water from high water content foods. So fruits and vegetables are the highest water content foods that we have. And you're also going to get a lot of great nutrients that we'll talk about why they're important in a little bit.
Yeah, and who doesn't like watermelon?
Oh my
If you don't
God.
like watermelon, like I don't know if I trust you.
It's perfect. I completely agree. The easiest ways to monitor hydration status, I kind of broke it up into 3 sections. So number 1 is monitor fluid intake. And that's what we were just talking about. It's funny. A lot of people have asked me before, like, is the drink 8-ounce glasses of water a day, like recommendation true? And I listened to a podcast recently. No, it wasn't a podcast. It was a webinar from the Pines Institute. And The speaker put it greatly. Like, that specific recommendation was actually created by the water companies back in the 50s to try to get people to drink more water. But when research has since been conducted, the recommendation is somewhere around, I think it's about 3.7 liters per day for women and about 4.2 liters per day for men, or it might have been 4.7. And that roughly works out to 8 cups of water for women, and I think about 12 cups of water for men. So the recommendation is pretty close. But we typically see the need for higher fluid intake amounts in larger bodied people, which obviously makes sense. And then leading up to exercise, you should also drink more because you're about to start sweating and you're going to lose a lot more. So monitor fluid intake, first way to monitor hydration status.
So for the difference between the men and the women, it's more so about the body size. That's
Yeah.
why okay, got it.
Yep. The second way, which is probably the way most people are familiar with, is monitoring urine color. The singular nutrition talk I ever had as an athlete was an athletic trainer showing us this P chart. It is a very simplified way to gauge how hydrated you are. The color you're kind of aiming for is that lemonade or a little bit lighter. If you're peeing straight clear water, you're not going to be overhydrated necessarily, unless you are like drinking way too much, way too fast, which actually lead to death. But I don't anticipate that being the problem for most people. It just might mean you don't have enough electrolytes to be holding on to the water. If you feel like you're just kind of drinking so much and then peeing it out, consider some electrolyte additions. But then as your urine starts to get darker, you are definitely approaching dehydration, and you should definitely drink water. And then the last and probably best way to monitor hydration status is to weigh yourself before and after a practice or competition. And then for every pound lost, you should replenish with 20 to 24 fluid ounces within the 6 hours post practice or competition. I recommend every athlete do this. A lot of my colleagues will do it with their teams. I plan to do it during training camp. It's really the most obvious way to show an athlete how much water they're losing, because at first they might be like, oh, sick, I've lost 4 pounds. Like, I'm getting skinny. It's like, no. You didn't lose any fat. All that 4 pounds is water. And now we need to replenish it, because if you go into tomorrow's practice 4 pounds lighter without that water in your system, you are going to be so sluggish and have a terrible practice.
Yeah,
So
for the coaches that are watching this, this is something that we've done in our program as well. And just setting this up, it's super simple. Before the athletes step onto the court, what we would do is we would have a laptop sitting right there on a desk. Right next to it is the scale. They hop on the scale, they type in their number, and then they head right onto the court. It literally takes less than a minute, and it's very eye-opening. And not to mention now, Dr. Werner, I'm not sure how you're going to feel about this, but it was also a way for us to monitor how much effort they were putting forth on the court as well, because there will be athletes who will weigh in at 150.3 and then they leave the court and they're at 150.5. And you're like, dude, you didn't lose any weight and all you did was drink a bunch of water and now you gain weight on the court. Right. So it's a way to, again, kind of monitor the effort a little bit. Don't go crazy with that portion, but it's super simple to set up.
yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It is a way to monitor effort. And it can be used for evil, there's no doubt. But I get what you're saying, and it does make sense to me that if you're trying to see if, maybe if somebody slipped through the cracks of having a bit of an easy day, that's gonna call them right out.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, so the second kind of set of information is all about fueling. And I say fueling because a lot of people think of food as just food, but athletes really need to be thinking of food as fuel. And the easiest way, so when we talk about an athlete's plate, this one in particular is the same version that you would see if you went to the USDA's website for the general population. And I choose this one specifically because for the most part, this is going to be the recommendation baseline. Variations from this might include more starches or grains, or a little bit more protein depending on the goals. But pretty much all of my athletes, I always come back to this, because if I tell an athlete to put half of their plate as fruits and vegetables, I'll be lucky if they make it a third of their plate.
Yeah.
And so I find overcompensating with the fruit and vegetable recommendation actually gets me closer to like a real recommendation than it does if I say make a quarter of your plate fruits and veggies. They're going to put like 3 pieces of broccoli and call it a day. So this is the easiest way to visualize it. Obviously, there's a ton of different options when it comes to what protein, starch, fruits, and veg you want to do. But something to notice is that 75% of this plate is carbohydrate. So fruits and vegetables are carbohydrates. A lot of
Yeah.
people make the mistake of thinking that fruits and veggies are in their own category and that carbohydrates are pastas and breads and rice and that kind of stuff. Fruits and vegetables are carbohydrates. They are a different type of carbohydrates than the starches and grains, which is why you shouldn't be only having fruits and vegetables and protein. You still need to incorporate the starches and grains, but 75% of this play is carbohydrate because basketball is an endurance sport. Yes, you need protein to build and maintain muscle, but you need carbohydrates to play basketball. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Have you run into, have any of your athletes come to you that were strictly vegetarian or vegan?
Yes.
And what kind of challenges did they face or you face when it came to navigating that road?
The biggest struggle is definitely protein intake, and especially because I'm dealing with much larger bodied guys. Um, Getting the protein needs in for somebody who plays a forward in the NBA and is a vegan, like you're not going to be a power forward, that's for sure. You're going to play at a small forward at best because you're not going to be able to maintain the body size and muscle mass necessary. It would be very difficult. Let me rephrase that. It would be extremely difficult. So that's something that I've faced as being a problem. There are nutrient deficiencies too that we have to keep an eye out for with vegans and vegetarians. But that can be solved with supplementation typically. And so can the protein intake, but I'm not one to recommend loading up on protein powder, and especially plant protein powder is less of a bioactive protein than whey powder. So
Yeah, I
it's,
was gonna say it's the bioavailability of it, right? Like you
yes.
can't really how would you say that you can't really absorb as much that's there? Is that
Well,
probably like the simplest way to put that?
you can. It just has a lower impact on muscle synthesis because it
Okay.
is low in leucine, which is kind of the amino acid that like triggers muscle
Right.
synthesis. Yeah, so it's harder to build muscle on plant protein essentially.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, that would be, but I mean I faced it before. I think the second challenge with it is just the kind of isolation, because it's so rare to have a vegan or vegetarian in the league that that person ends up needing like all their own food for stuff, and that can make things difficult because food is social and it's, we're surrounded by it all the time. So for them to need their own food separate from everybody else can be kind of isolating.
And to be clear, we're not telling anybody don't be vegan or vegetarian. We're not on that kick. We're just talking about, maybe some of the challenges that you might face. That's all.
Yeah. It's totally possible to be an elite athlete on a vegan and vegetarian diet. It absolutely is. It takes a lot more intention and effort.
For sure.
Okay. Nutrient timing. So this is kind of where we break down very simply the macronutrients that are needed for before, during, and after training, as well as just day-to-day recovery. So I broke it into a few slides, and since you guys are getting this recording, I'm going to go a little quickly. But before training, the priority is hydration and carbohydrates. You do not want to be eating a high-fat, high-protein meal right before training. For the most part, you're going to have that big meal probably 3 to 4 hours before training or competition. And then in the 30 to 60 minutes prior to training, you should be having a carbohydrate snack. So somewhere around 30 grams, which is like a banana or a Nutri-Grain bar, should be sufficient. If you're a larger bodied athlete, you might need more than that, but just go for what you are comfortable with. Then during training, you really would be fine with just water, unless your training is going to be greater than 60 minutes, which I don't know a single basketball practice that's ever been less than 60 minutes. So for the most part, you're probably going to need some form of carbohydrate. That's why products like Gatorade exist, because they are the perfect balance of fluids and carbohydrates and electrolytes. Their electrolyte profile is a little bit less effective than some other products that are on the market, but from a carbohydrate standpoint, it cannot be beat. After training is where we start working in the protein. So protein is a day-to-day nutrient. It is not necessarily like this idea of an anabolic window does not actually exist. What is much more important is that you get consistent protein throughout the day. So that's why I emphasize it after training, not to trick people into thinking that an anabolic window exists, but actually just because, since I'm recommending you stay away from protein pre-training, by the time you get done training, you've had probably 5 or 6 hours maybe without intaking protein. And that's why I say, okay, now that we're done training, we need protein. That doesn't mean we don't need carbs still, because you just burned up all the carbs in your muscle and you need to replenish those for next day's training. And then the fluid that we talked about, for every pound of weight you lose, making sure you're intaking fluids. So this can be done by combining a lot of things. Like chocolate milk is a classic. It has fluid, it has protein, it has carbs. We love it. Things like, cottage cheese also has carbohydrate in it. And you can really kind of do this any way, shape, or form. The idea is to just start getting something into the system as soon as you have an appetite for it after training. And even if you don't have much of an appetite for it, it really is important to start refueling immediately, because there's been enough research to show that basically your muscles are super thirsty when you're done working out. They want the carbs, they want the fluid, they want the protein. And if you miss that period of time, you just end up being able to store less of it.
So, as far as, with your recommendations, you're saying that having protein and fats before a training is you're saying go away from that, avoid that. Why would you avoid proteins and fats before a training session?
For the most part, it's because of the gut distress that it can cause. Everybody's going to be different with that. Some people can tolerate more protein and fat closer to exercise than other people can. But what you should not be doing is having a fast food meal an hour before you're about to go into basketball practice. That is likely going to result in some gut distress for you. It's much more effective to focus that time period on carbohydrates. And again, this is only the 60 minutes leading up to training. This isn't saying if your practice is at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, you shouldn't have protein and fat all day. No. You should absolutely have a full meal with plenty of protein and fat in it in that 3 to 4 hours before training or a game. But then in that 60-minute window, it's carbs only.
Right. Yeah. So the athletes who are, maybe in high school, if your lunch block is 11 o'clock and you're practicing at 2 o'clock, still have your lunch.
Yep.
We're not saying oh no, I got practice in 2 hours. I'm not trying to eat any protein or fat or anything like that. Not still go through your lunch.
Exactly. So then the last piece of this is just nutrition for recovery in general. This is really what I recommend as kind of a daily eating pattern. I want my athletes focusing on nutrition for recovery day in and day out. So the macronutrients are what we use for energy and for body repair, essentially. So protein is going to help with muscle repair and building, whereas carbohydrates are going to give us the energy that we need. You need both carbs and protein. Fat is also essential. It just has less of an ergogenic reason for taking it in, but you shouldn't have an issue getting in fat in your diet in general. And then micronutrients are how we're going to reduce inflammation. So just having starches and proteins is really not enough for recovery because of the inflammatory factors that exist during exercise and that we essentially do to ourselves. You need the antioxidants and the phytochemicals that you're going to get from fruits and vegetables in order to alleviate that inflammatory effect of exercise. And then having those fibrous carbohydrates as well are going to help with this inflammation. It's going to help with gut health in general.
Yeah. So for the fiber, how important is it? Like, does fiber play a role in all of this? Because I know there's a lot of, prebiotics and probiotics out there. Like, just for anybody who's curious as well, ProMix is another one of our big supporters of Hoop Study. Ironically, this wasn't planned. I had no idea what Dr. Werner was going to talk about tonight, but ironically, I have my ProMix Deep Low. It's a prebiotic probiotic. Love it. Use it every single morning. And for me personally, I feel great using it. And I truly do notice a big difference. But when it comes to the science behind it, I've got no idea what it does. I just know that if I take that, like, I feel much better.
So, I mean, fiber is one of the most important nutrients, and often the most forgotten nutrient. It's kind of how would I put this? It's a category of nutrients. So you get fiber from primarily carbohydrates, and different, whether it be starch, grain, fruit, or vegetable has different levels of carbohydrate and different types of carbohydrate. There's soluble and insoluble, but essentially what it is it adds bulk to your diet and helps with gut health. So it's going to add bulk to your stool. It's going to help promote solidification of stool if you're dealing with loose stool. It's going to be something that feeds the gut bacteria, because without good, healthy gut bacteria, you're going to have a miserable time. Like there's really no way around it. The more diverse your gut bacteria are, the more health related outcomes that are going to be positive. There's been tons and tons of research around this. And frankly, it's going to keep coming out. More and more research is going to keep coming out because the gut is an absolute mystery in a lot of ways. So what we do know is that for fiber intake, there's been enough really high quality research to show that higher fiber intake is related to more, better longevity, better health outcomes in the long run. And then for athletes, it's better recovery, because think about this, like your gut is the gateway in and out of your body, right? So everything you eat and drink is absorbed through what is technically classified as the gut.
Right.
And so if the security guards of your body are letting in terrible things because they're tired, overworked, underpaid, all of those things, you are going to have a harder time staying healthy. Whereas if the gut, your security guards of your body, are highly paid, highly trained, energetic, like ready to do their job, you are going to be much healthier.
Yeah, so the microbiome is huge, right? Like, it helps regulate everything, helps with the digestion process, helps absorb those nutrients and,
Yep.
Be able to take them in efficiently and, distribute them and effectively use them.
Yeah, and on top of that, the gut is related to mental health. There's this whole concept of the gut brain axis. I mean, the gut is literally like, it's ground zero for everything that we do. It's related to skin health, health of every organ. Like there's no understating how important gut health is.
Now, this might not be in your expertise, and we talked earlier about if you don't know something, like, that's quite all right, no big deal. I've heard that things like kombucha is good for your gut health and things of
Yep.
that nature. Like, how much, based off of, your knowledge, how much truth is there to
It's
that?
absolutely true. So when you showed the Pro Mix, you said it's a prebiotic and a probiotic. So for people who don't know what those two things are, a prebiotic is a food that helps feed your gut bacteria. So it's essentially like fruits and vegetables are prebiotics. They are things that are going to promote the health of the bacteria. A probiotic is bacterial strains itself.
Okay.
So that's what like probiotic supplements are, is you're literally taking in healthy gut bacteria, essentially. Whether they populate in the gut or not is going to be dependent on a lot of different factors. And that's why kind of there's mixed reviews on probiotic supplementation. But what we do know is that foods that are probiotic, which includes kombucha, includes Greek yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sourdough bread has a probiotic factor to it. It's anything that has been fermented and not killed off with alcohol. So don't get it twisted. Beer, because it's fermented, is not a probiotic. The alcohol in it completely neutralizes that benefit. But anything else fermented is going to be probiotic because you are introducing those bacterial strains into the food itself.
Yeah, and of all the people who are watching this right now, if there's anybody down in Charlotte, there are some fire kimchi dishes at Soul Food out in Charlotte, North Carolina. Soul Food is where it's at. They've got the best wings that I've ever had, and that's a bold statement. Bold statement to make. If Dave Portnoy did a wing review, those wings at Soul Food they would be in the nines.
I'm gonna have to keep that in mind for when we travel to Charlotte.
Yeah, Soul Food's the spot. You gotta hit that up.
Soul Foods, noted, noted.
Well,
All
Coach, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight. Again,
right.
some of the follow-up questions that I might have for you. Realistically speaking, we're talking to, a high school athlete, a college athlete. They don't have a nutritionist, they don't have a dietitian, readily available for them. What are some of the things that they can keep in mind when building out their diet? And to be clear for everybody that's listening, when we say diet, we're not talking about fad diets. We're not talking about, oh, I saw this person, did this crazy challenge and it worked out for them. What are some of the things that their diet should consist of on a daily basis?
I think I'll just go back to it this
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Fruits and vegetables. I cannot emphasize enough how important fruits and vegetables are. You cannot just eat protein and starches and take a multivitamin and, be the best that you can be. That's just not how it works. Your body has literally over thousands of years evolved to a place where we want fruits and vegetables. We need fruits and vegetables. And that's the number one thing. Like if I could ask you to do one thing, it's just eat fruits and vegetables.
As far as because not all proteins are created equally. We talked about, those vegan and vegetarian, plant-based, we'll just call it that way. Those plant-based proteins, they're a little bit less effective as far as how the protein is prepared, right? Like whether they go grab a fried chicken sandwich from a fast food spot as opposed to a grilled chicken, or, is there a big difference there?
Yeah, absolutely. Fried chicken is coated in bread and fried in fat. So that is two additional macronutrients, as opposed to just a grilled chicken, which is only protein. So the biggest difference is it's not just the macronutrients, it's the fact that frying something introduces essentially inflammatory processes to the food that you are going to take in, and it's going to be pro-inflammatory for your body, and not the good kind of inflammation. It's going to be negative. So in addition to the more calories and probably the higher sodium content of a fried chicken versus a grilled chicken, you're not really setting yourself up for success and that's not to say you can never have it, because I'm a huge proponent of everything in moderation, and don't get me wrong, fried chicken is delicious. I would try to steer away from it, especially immediately after exercise or like training or competition, and then just as infrequently as possible.
Yeah, because that was going to be the next question that I asked too. Because I like with you, when people say like, "Oh, I'm completely cutting these things out of my diet," like that's a really hard thing to do. And what a lot of the times you see is that people relapse on that anyway, right? Completely cutting foods out of their diet. So that was the question that I was going to ask. Like, if they're going to treat themselves, to a, whatever their favorite meal is that isn't something that they should have directly after their workout, when could they have that?
On an off day and with a side of vegetables.
There you go. On an off day with the side of vegetables. All right. And then last question for you. For the coaches who are providing team meals, or maybe it's the parents and they're just, hosting a team meal for, a rec league team or whatever the case may be. Is it realistic for them to just get kind of like a fruit tray with vegetables and stuff like that, and then maybe aim for, this is afterwards, we're going to talk about afterwards, should they aim for just, like a grilled chicken or maybe some, fish or beef, and try to stay completely away from the fried foods?
In an ideal world, yeah. Again, I think if it's something that I would rather have somebody have something fried than to have nothing at all.
Yeah, that's fair.
So if that's going to be the case, then yeah, go for it. If that's all you have time to pick up from the store, or you're doing a fast food or something like that, and you have to have a fried option, I would say, like, my general rule for dining out is only one fried thing on your plate. So if you're going to have the fried chicken, your side should be the apple slices or a vegetable of some sort, as opposed to like the French fries. Or if you really want French fries, you should have the grilled chicken. So kind of trying to balance that way. And like I said, there's no bad foods. It's all about moderation, and then how you can add nutrients to that same meal. So however parents need to do it, I guess.
Right. Last question. We'll let you get out of here.
All
For
good.
the older athletes,
Mm.
the college athletes, the professional athletes, alcohol. What kind of an impact does alcohol have, on the athlete's body?
Oh my gosh. Everybody's about to hate me. It literally does nothing good for you. Not a single thing. Now, somebody's going to raise their hand and be like, "Well, what about red wine?" There's the studies that say red wine and longevity are related. Yes, but that's not what we're dealing with right now. What we're
Right.
dealing with in the present. And also, when you go out and drink, I promise you, you're not just having one glass of wet red wine and calling it a night. Like, that's just not realistic. So alcohol dehydrates you. It impairs cognition. It really messes with sleep. It's essentially like, this is going to sound extreme, but it's poison in a lot of ways. And, all of these detrimental effects happen because the body is trying to clear that poison out of the system. So although can be super fun and, gives you a fun mental state for a little while, the negative consequences, really don't outweigh the positives.
For
Or
sure.
really do outweigh the positives. Tons of negative consequences, only negative consequences.
There you go. Yeah, LeBron, don't get mad at us. We know that you're a big red wine fan, but that's okay. You can enjoy that after winning your gold medals.
I'd be happy to have that discussion with you directly, LeBron.
All right, coach, we really appreciate it. Just a couple of things to get us out of here. If people wanted to maybe follow you and what you have going on, what would be the best way for them to see what Dr. Werner has coming up in the future?
You know what? I shouldn't have closed out so soon. So people can visit my website directly. That's eateliteperform.com. I do have an Instagram. It's not a very like influencer-y Instagram. It's just my personal Instagram, but I share some of the stuff that either I'm doing with the Sixers or, meals I have in my personal life that could be good examples for you. And then my LinkedIn, you're welcome to connect with me, send me a message. I will, if you mention this podcast, that would be great so that I have a little context as to why you're reaching out to me, but I will definitely try to get back to you.